Hey everyone! Today we are going to be looking at how we can assign organisms into trophic levels. So to get started with this, we're going to look at an example food chain. And for the purposes of this video, we're going to assume that our food chains end after 4 spots. Now, I know that some of my students have drawn incredibly convoluted food chains where little frog is eaten by medium-sized snake, which is eaten by bird, which is eaten by giant spider, but that's not really what is going to happen here. And we're going to be looking at a straightforward 4-step food chain. Every food chain that we work with in ecosystems has to begin at the first trophic level. That's right here, the first trophic level, number 1. The first trophic level always begins with green plants. Green plants are the foundations of every single food chain. These are our producers. So if you've ever been asked to place an organism into a trophic level, and you can figure out that that organism is a green plant, maybe it's a maple tree, that's a green plant. It's going to go in the first trophic level. Maybe it's a fern, also a green plant, also a producer, going to go in the first trophic level. Flowers, such as my favorite little dandelion, these are green plants. They go in the first trophic level. So if you're ever given a green plant, you know that it has to go in the first trophic level. You would never put a dandelion in the 3rd step in a food chain. You would never have, frog, hawk, dandelion. That'd be really cool alien ecosystem, but that's not what happens with us. So anytime we have a green plant, we know we're going to be placing this in the first step of a food chain, which means that green plants are in the first trophic level. Let's go ahead and look at what the second trophic level would be. In the second trophic level, something that would go in the second square of a food chain, so number 2, is a consumer. Consumers means they eat living things. They don't collect energy from the sunlight like green plants. They have to eat something. But the consumers in the second level are special because they consume green plants. That's what makes the second trophic level special. They consume green plants. They don't eat meat. Don't eat meat. So we can list examples of consumers that we would put in the second chain of a food chain. So the second little link here, something that eats green plants but doesn't eat meat. And you could have something like a rabbit. You could even include larger animals like a deer. You could have small animals like a grasshopper. That really doesn't matter as long as it is a consumer, which means it's not a green plant, and it consumes green plants, doesn't eat meat. Don't eat meat. We can even put a moose. Moose is great big, and we can put it here. That's what it means to be in the second trophic level. It doesn't mean that it eats every possible thing in the first trophic level. Just because a grasshopper is in the second trophic level doesn't mean that it eats every possible plant. But it does mean that if I asked you to place a grasshopper into this food chain of unknown blocks, you would know that the grasshopper has to go into the second link. It can't be the first. It can't be the first because the first is only green plants. It can't be the last. We're going to get into that in a moment because grasshoppers are not apex predators. Grasshoppers only eat green plants, so they have to come after a green plant. And that's what makes these organisms in the second trophic level. Let's go ahead and look at the third trophic level. In this third trophic level, right here, this is our number 3. These are also consumers. That means they don't produce their own energy. We know we're not dealing with green plants. And at this point, I'm hoping that you're thinking of something that's going to be eating other living things. So eats other living things. But if you're in the third trophic level, it's actually quite specific what other living things you eat, because you are called a secondary consumer. And a secondary consumer means you eat meat. You eat meat. Things in the third trophic level are not living off of green plants. These are not your rabbits, not your grasshoppers. These are things that need to eat meat to survive. However, it's not at the end of a food chain. So I typically like to tell my students that a secondary consumer eats meat, but gets eaten. So these are your animals which you expect to eat smaller animals, but also live in constant fear of being eaten themselves. And we can include things here like a frog. We can include something here like a snake. Often, many birds fall into the third trophic level. If you think of something like a robin, because a robin eats worms, but a robin also lives in fear of being eaten by a hawk or an osprey or anything that like swoops down and smacks it out of the sky. Being in the third trophic level does not mean that you'll eat anything in the second trophic level. It simply means that if, in question, we were talking about a frog, in which link in a food chain would you have to place it? And what I would hope that you would know is that a frog can't be in the first link, because even though a frog is green, a frog is not a plant. Frogs can't be in the second link, because the second link, the second trophic level, are organisms that only live off of green plants. Frogs do not eat grass. Frogs like to eat bugs. So a frog can't be in the second trophic level. In the third trophic level, we're looking at organisms that like to eat meat, so they eat smaller animals, but they also get eaten. And that's where a frog lands, because a frog is being terrified of being eaten by all sorts of other animals. You can have multiple animals in this third trophic level where students will argue, but the snake could eat the frog or a frog could eat the snake. That doesn't really matter. What matters is if I ask you to place the frog, in which level would you place the frog? And it has to go into the third, because a frog eats meat but is also living in fear of being eaten. Last level. Our last level, this final little link in our food chain, the end of our food chain, is the fourth trophic level. The fourth trophic level is our apex predators. These apex predators eat meat. And I have to kind of say, so that folks understand, typically not eaten. Because I'll make the case that a shark is an apex predator, and someone will, without doubt, come along and say, well, you know that killer whales can eat a shark. Yeah, that's true, but sharks are top of a food chain, and we consider them to be in the fourth trophic level. So in the fourth trophic level are our apex predators. They eat meat, and they are typically not eaten. You think of them as like the masters of their ecosystem. So we are looking at organisms like eagle, or shark, or lion, or tiger. If I asked you to place one of these organisms into a food chain, and I didn't tell you what else was in the food chain, you should know A tiger cannot be in the first trophic level. A tiger is not a green plant. A tiger cannot be in the second trophic level because a tiger does not live off of eating green plants. We might even consider this tiger for the third trophic level if you ask yourself, a tiger eats meat. That's true. But does a tiger typically live in fear of being eaten by other organisms? A tiger doesn't. And sometimes you have to know a little bit about the organisms to understand whether it's in the second, third, or fourth. But a tiger doesn't live in fear of being eaten all the time, which would place it into the fourth trophic level, which makes it an apex predator. I hope that this was helpful in helping folks understand how to sort different organisms into the trophic levels. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comments below. Otherwise, thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing you next time.